see such a great turnout today. Thank you, everyone. James, do you have something that you're going to want to share?
Yeah, I can do a, would it be best to do a screenshot, or should I send a copy over to Emily?
James, I can make you the presenter so you can actually share your screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, though I should warn you that, you know, you probably shouldn't give people like me power.
You can certainly say the same thing about me.
It's not too late, Irina. Hey, James, how are you? This is Clyde.
I'm well. Hey, Clyde, how are you?
Pretty good.
So, should I go ahead and begin?
Sorry, I was on mute. Let's wait just another minute, and then we can go ahead and introduce you and what it is we're doing.
Great.
Okay. Let's see, do we have Clark? So I know Clark was going to be joining. All right, Irina, is there any business that we need to start with before we do introductions?
No, I don't think so. We can go ahead and start.
Okay. All right. So everyone, thank you very much for joining. This is Kristen Gibson. Today we have a special presentation. So thank you all for joining. So we have James, and James has been set up with setting up kind of a taxonomy around badges, and from IACET. I don't know how we actually pronounce that. Clyde had sent him over to us after our last in-person meeting, where we had been talking about, you know, setting up some sort of taxonomy around badging. And so I was really excited when Clyde sent James to us to have this conversation. So really wanted to get all of you together, get your thoughts on this, and just have some great discussion. So with that, James, welcome. Just so you know, on the call, and I will apologize if I leave out a company, but we have National Instruments, IBM, Ericsson, we have HPE, we have the Linux Foundation, and I'm sure I missed somebody, but you've got a pretty good group here of IT companies. So and I know Clark Porter is going to be joining from Pearson Acclaim as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent, thank you, I appreciate it. So just by a quick way of situating myself within badges, I worked in educational assessment at Purdue University and worked part with the passport program all the way back in like 2012, I think, which might as well be a million years ago for IT and especially badges. And then was hired by Dan Hickey at IU, Indiana University, where I worked with him for several years on a MacArthur Foundation grant studying badges and badge practices and how badges work better in certain organizations, particularly affiliations with higher education. So much of my background with badges has been in the kind of the theoretical academic research-based space, and also with kind of the practical implications of badges and how they work better in certain organizations. So that's where I got queued up with ISET and started working with Joe and his great organization several years ago on Dan's project. And then when the project concluded, started working with Joe to kind of bring it to fruition and bring the standard. So ISET having a standard, so organizations that are affiliated with ISET can have some direction and some notion of exactly what ISET is looking for badges. So that's how I got plugged into ISET. And we're kind of right at the cusp, I think, of moving the standard forward and making it public and making it a product. But one of the things, kind of the final steps to do that, is to develop a taxonomy to help organizations, both in the IT space as well as other organizations, to be able to think about their badges and do that. So what I would like to show you, and the reason I'm on this call, is that if it's appropriate from your members and from your organization, I'd like to have ITCC's endorsement and of this taxonomy to be able to, when we go with the ISET and we make this public and it becomes a thing, if you will, I'd like to have ITCC's endorsement behind it. So several of you have seen this already. Can I get a confirmation that you can see my screen?
I can see it.
We can see it.
Excellent. Okay, so just very quickly to orient your eyes, the red parts, the red text, which I'll cover, these are items that have changed since the few of you that have seen this already have not seen the parts in red. So this reflects some of the preliminary feedback that I have received from folks in the industry. And again, the red text is sort of new. So to very quickly go through the taxonomy, we have this broken down in the very top level, the style. I have 3 different ways of thinking about badges. Badges that are participation on the left, badges that represent learning in the middle, and badges that represent what I call competence with validation on the right. So this is not necessarily hierarchical, nor does it represent more or less advanced badges, even though it may sort of feel like that. Rather, this is meant with the kind of just general Aristotelian notion of taxonomy of, okay, we've got this big beast, now how do we make sense of it for our purposes? So the types of badges, the next line down. Under participation, I've broken this into 2, attendance badges and contribution or recognition badges. So an attendance badge, and I think many people, particularly as they get into badges, they sort of think about like, well, I'd like to issue a badge for attendance, but I'd like to do something people actually care about, not just as a one-off sort of thing. So the way that I've defined this as a badge earner participates in an event like a professional development, classroom, or online learning, but has not taken an assessment. So an example of the evidence, which particularly as a researcher, that's what I worry about the most with badges, is having valid and reasonable evidence that people can look at and say, yeah, this means something. So an evidence of an attendance badge would be a statement of attendance activities, participation linked to an event. This could be further expanded into an area where a person is able to include a copy of his or her paper that was given at a conference, that sort of thing. So the next badge under participation would be what I call a contribution or a recognition badge. So this is different than an attendance badge. In this, a badge earner has made a non-trivial contribution as part of a team or project. And you'll notice, for those of you that have given feedback, this in many cases represents your direct wording. Jim Licari, I think this actually was one of your recommendations. So a non-trivial contribution as part of a team or project. This can also serve as a recognition of accomplishment, like an award, which is useful to some organizations. So examples of that evidence would be a statement of the contribution, an artifact or a link to that contribution. And if used as a recognition of achievement, it would be like a statement of achievement or award with a supplementary link to the justification for that recognition. So those 2 badge types would fall under participation. So
Jim, I have a question for you. So I guess I have a response when I hear of a participation badge, and it's not necessarily a positive response. So I completely get attendance badge there. So can you help me to understand, or us to understand, the rationale for putting the contribution or recognition badge under participation and not under a different area?
Yeah, so I think that if someone is contributing or they have recognition of a badge, that is because they have participated in some event. They have done something that is participatory, and I'm thinking very specifically of like learning science with participatory forms of assessment. That doesn't quite necessarily fit under learning, meaning that if an organization is issuing a recognition badge. That doesn't necessarily indicate that they have done something with learning or that it had a validated test or something like that, but rather is just an acknowledgement that this badge represents that this person did something. It was a non-trivial thing, but that it doesn't fit nicely under the other categories that I've set out.
Okay.
Yeah, I think James just says, Clark, just to maybe extend on that a little, I almost wonder whether that's not a separate category in its own right, right? Because in the other cases, we're talking about folks who are making some sort of investment in their own professional development, whereas for the contribution badge, it's almost the opposite. We're asking people who have, it's a reflection of people who have domain knowledge and expertise who have contributed that knowledge back.
Great. So as you can probably see, I'm taking notes, so I will go back and I very much believe in getting feedback and making changes accordingly. So thank you.
Kristen, is that consistent with what I thought I was hearing here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for instance, we're getting ready to do some recognition badges for ITCC, about being a member of, working, for instance, it would be the person who does the Innovation Award. That would be a contribution/recognition badge. And that to me means a lot more than participation. And I guess participation just gives me a sort of feeling. So that's, I think if there was, I can certainly understand trying to not have too many styles. Totally get that. So I'm almost wondering, just.
No, that's fair. That's completely fair.
Yeah, I mean, I agree kind of with Kristen on the participation. It's more of a check the box sort of thing, right? If it's participate, it's like, for example, at our company, everybody in the company has to do a security awareness, webinar or e-learning course or something for 30 minutes. Okay, you check the box, you attended, or you were in a classroom for 30 minutes or whatever the case might be. You didn't necessarily have to put time into doing some sort of a quiz or test or even contribute anything. You just absorbed information. Or you started the class and walked away and, came back at the end to say you were done.
Who does that? Yep. Okay, very good. So thank you. This, as you'll see on the title, is a V2 because all the documents that I work on, particularly with groups, I go through versioning and iteration because I want to make sure to reflect the needs. And to be perfectly honest and in full disclosure, I mean, with this taxonomy, that this would need to be usable both with your group, particularly with IT, but also usable with other groups that reflect ISITs. But I think with that division of maybe that under participation would just be the attendance badge, and that there would need to be a new style to represent the recognition badges, in order to make sure that the language is fully articulating what that purpose is. I think that's completely fair. And I think that other organizations and domains would find that to be useful too. Okay, so in the middle category, learning, so different types of learning badges. Again, learning functioning very differently than participation or what we might style a recognition or award badge, that sort of thing. So I've broken these into two groups, a grade-based badge and a leveling badge. So serving two different functions, whereas a grade-based badge is representing the graded activities of a kind of a standalone assessment or something like that, whereas a level or a program badge is indicating how that badge fits within a curriculum, fits within multiple other different divisions. So a grade-based badge, the earner has earned formal credit for a learning event. That can be defined in many different ways. That's way beyond the scope of this taxonomy because different organizations will define it differently. But generally, I've indicated here that this would be a proctored learning assessment. That suggestion actually comes from Jaron Schmidt, who indicated that it might be helpful to have whether or not something should be proctored or unproctored here. And then the types of evidence that would fit in with that would include a statement of learning gain or a type of assessment, a score with a cut score, with a link to the artifact learning. However, and this again is taking into consideration some of the feedback I got, that if a cut score is inappropriate or unavailable, which is it would be with some IT exams, for example, that the additional description of the assessment and outcome could suffice for that. The second one, the level of program badge, again, fits a little bit differently than the one-off learning activity, that this would be more of a series or a curriculum, and that this can also serve as encouragement and progress to a larger learning goal. So just like curricula in a program can take many different functions, this would take different functions too, but it would need to specify how it fits within a pathway. I can see where these types of badges would be proctored or unproctored, mainly because in my time at Indiana University studying these things, I saw different types of leveling badges where sometimes it was appropriate to have a proctored exam. Other times it was more that they finished the requirements and they moved on to the next task as a low stakes type of thing. So this would include a statement, a style or structure of it, context, different types of assessments. These are examples. And if this is used as encouragement, as moving on to the next thing, that it would detail the progression so that someone taking a quick look at the badge could see, oh, okay, well, this was number 3 in a series of 6 badges. And that would make sense. So let me pause for a second and get your feedback about the learning style badges.
So you've got the grade-based badge as being proctored learning, but the other one may be proctored or unproctored. So is there a rationale as to why you have them in that order?
Yes. So a grade-based badge, meaning that if it's a standalone activity where the badge functions to signal that someone has a standalone learning achievement, then it would need to be proctored in some sense in order to show that that standalone activity has done something. Whereas with the programmatic badge or a curriculum badge, as it fits within it, I can see, and I've seen multiple programs where there have been badges that have been proctored and can serve as a standalone badge within a progression, but I've also seen others where they just need to achieve certain learning gains that can be done with an automated testing, that sort of thing. So in that sense, it wouldn't necessarily need to be proctored.
So James, are you thinking a grade-based badge is more summative and these level badges are more formative, kind of going along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually kind of, I thought about that. I resisted putting that in there in order to make it a little bit too prescriptive, but I think that in terms of thinking about this conceptually, that's absolutely a good way to think about it. And I kind of wondered if I should be more summative formative myself, but so just my philosophy of building a taxonomy is that in my professional opinion, it should be as a really good, useful tool, but it should also be freeing to people in order to be able to innovate within the taxonomy itself. So this sets up some parameters, or the bowling parameter, so the bowling ball gets to the end, right? Instead of it being absolutely prescriptive. The proctored and unproctored, again, was from feedback, but I think that this kind of helps get to the point of what exactly is the function of that badge. Is this a standalone claim, or is this something that is a claim within a series of badges?
Yeah, but I mean, if you were a student at a university and you finished your course and passed your final exam, then you might get a grade. And the word proctored might imply to those of us in the certification business a little different thing than in higher education.
Yes, that's true.
Just speaking from the IBM perspective, sorry, we're having a lot going. is that there's a big difference between that grade-based badge and the attendance badge. Because we have a lot, for instance, that I think we would consider grade-based, but that are not proctored.
I'm actually personally not necessarily having either specification of proctored or unproctored. I included that in there.
Hey James.
Can everyone go on mute if they're not talking?
Great. Okay. So I'm actually personally not necessarily wedded to the proctored or unproctored. I thought that was an interesting suggestion that I wanted to include to get feedback on. So if that's, I personally think that a grade-based badge that fits under the learning style is different than an attendance badge, much more so than the proctored aspect of it. And if that's something where if the specifying whether it's proctored or unproctored is a sticking point, I'm not opposed to taking that out. I just thought that it was an interesting suggestion for feedback.
It is, but I recommend taking it out because I also agree with you. I think attendance and a grade are way different because in attendance, you don't really know if the person got anything out of it. So whatever process went on that led to getting a grade, you know that they achieved at a certain level, which is documented by the grade. And it could be a final paper or project. I mean, I think it's just evidence that you learned something. So that would be my opinion. But Kristen, I do think it's a lot different than saying I attended.
I think it's hugely different. I think there's a big gap between an attendance badge and a grade-based badge. So I would definitely be a fan of, I like the idea of the grade-based badge. I would just remove the proctored requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, James, as I think about that, and I'm looking also at the comment that Elwood put into the chat. I do like the idea of having the attendance badge in a different category than the learning badge, because I think there's a little bit of sort of debasing the currency if mere attendance starts to get sort of too close to things that actually have an assessment attached. So,
I'm sorry, just to clarify, so the attendance badge under the participation style versus the grade-based badge, which is under the learning style. So those are different. I mean, they're not
right. I guess I'm just calling. Polling the audience here in terms of whether folks agree. I just as I reflect on it and the discussion we just had, having attendance in a different category.
Oh, I see.
Is useful. I think it helps focus people on the fact that it is something that's categorically different than having a grade based.
Great. Okay.
But maybe jumping a little ahead, how does grade based then differ from performance badge? Because in both cases you have an evaluation. I'll trust you. You may sort that out.
Yeah. Aristotle is smiling somewhere, right? Right. So to jump ahead, the final category, the learning style, is competence with, and I'm calling competence with validation. This titling sort of changed a little bit, but the whole point being that this is demonstrated with a proctored assessment. Again, whether or not that language is in there is debatable. But so, for example, the performance badge is that the badge earner has demonstrated skills in a high-stakes environment. The badge earner successfully demonstrates claims to performance. So the way that I'm thinking about performance badge, again, the high stakes is the really careful language here, in the sense that when you take a grade-based, like a grade-based type of badge, the formal learning event can be something where it's the work over the the course of a semester or the course of a 3-week training or something like this. Or it can be lower stakes, whereas when I'm talking about a performance badge, what I'm actually trying to get at here is that this demonstrates competence. So the difference might be in the IT world where if you have a grade-based badge, you're showing that you have learned something, you've learned a skill, and you can recognize the fact that you have learned that skill, and you have an assessment that says, yeah, you've learned it. But the performance badge has a fundamental difference in the sense that it was a high-stakes type of assessment that someone can endorse that and say, this person performed this and did this, and it's higher stakes than the grade-based badge. So again, under the evidence, it would be a statement of learning gain and performance demonstration, a type of assessment and score with a cut score indicated, and also a link to the artifact of learning. So a description, an artifact, or other data would be needed to justify the claims of successful performance. And that is a little bit different than the final one, the certification or license badge, where a badge owner has demonstrated competence in a substantial domain of knowledge. So again, the performance badge is in some ways kind of a demonstration of a particular set of skills or a particular assessment, a high stakes assessment, whereas a certification or licensure is for the bigger picture, that this person has the demonstrated skills of all these things sort of put together. So it is a substantial domain of knowledge as opposed to a high stakes, more narrow version of knowledge. Again, for organizations that might issue these badges, the difference between performance and certification is based more on, is the performance on a particular set parameter of not minimized, but a set parameter of skills versus certification, which is more that this person has demonstrated competency within the entire domain of knowledge. So the evidence for that would be a statement of context for professional certification or licensure with links to description of the awarding body, the type of assessment is indicated along with a score and a cut score. So again, some of these, I think the differences between them tend to be a bit subtle. So very much like the grade-based badge, where that might reflect kind of the smaller one-off, whereas the leveling badge is more of the bigger picture of the curriculum. That same type of funnel is what I had in mind with the competence and validation between the performance, which is a performance on a high stakes assessment, versus certification, which is saying that this person has this knowledge. So for example, to use a medical example, if you were to issue a badge for a medical student studying kidneys, for example, you could say that a performance badge is for the person's complete understanding of the kidney as a standalone organ, whereas a certification or licensure would say that this person is qualified to practice medicine as a nephrologist because he or she understands the entire complexity of kidneys and how they relate to the urinary tract system and how they relate to the liver and how they relate to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more of the bigger scope. Okay, so let me pause for a minute. What do you think?
It has got me thinking a lot about the separation, not even the badges in the taxonomy. It's just I'm trying to rethink how I view these. So I'm just gonna be talking, and I'm not critical of anything going on here. I'm just trying to sort this out in my mind. When I assess skills through a certification, I am attempting to determine if the individual has the skill to take disparate pieces of knowledge or different skills and solve new problems in a unique way. That's kind of how I view it. Mm-hmm. I don't often articulate it that well, but that's essentially it. So using the kidney and medical example, one grade-based badge might be knowledge of what the kidney function is and how it associates itself with other systems in the human body. Performance badge would be the insertion, removal, or repair of a kidney. The certification or license badge might be the ability to assimilate different problems within a kidney, such as a cancer or a stone or whatever, to properly repair and fix or remove and replace that kidney. So I kind of see it that way. So that if the medical doctor was unable or never has seen the problem before, could repair the issue, could fix the issue, and that's the skill I would be going for in a certification or license, and a performance would be under that, and then a grade base would be more along the lines of knowledge and understanding. Okay, now how does that fit in with what we got here? And then the other question I had is, some of our certifications have performance in a performance assessment embedded within them, such as Clyde and Linux Foundation are just heavy into performance-based tests within their certifications. That's all they do. Okay, so I'm just talking to think, I guess. Anybody else have comments in that area?
I'll say I had the same thought as you, Jem, as far as Linux, because Clyde, your exams were the first one that came to mind. In my mind, that would still be a certification license badge. When I think of a performance badge, I think of, for instance, somebody goes into a tool at an event, creates an application that meets the requirements of that event, and I could see that as being a performance badge from an IT perspective. A grade-based badge might be that I took the course that teaches me how to create applications, but since doing the grade-based, I've gotten experience of created other applications, and now I'm able to go to this hackathon and meet the requirements and develop that app on demand.
Right. Yeah, I guess the use case I was thinking of as James was discussing this is top-up certifications, right? So if you have a certification on a major product or domain, and then there's a top-up exam that basically covers the delta between the last release and the current release, then the top-up is more for performance, right? Because it's a narrower view of basically the updates from when last, whereas the underlying certification on the major domain is at the certification or license level. Because I think and as I think about this dichotomy, trying to draw the line as to, okay, when is it big enough to be a major area of knowledge versus when it's, something that's more tactical.
So I think this is actually when I was beginning to sort through the literature, and I'll actually show here. So as much as I would like to claim that this came directly out of my head, it did not. This was based on a number of pieces of literature of people that have been thinking about this for quite some time, as well as the folks that have given me some feedback on it, is to develop a taxonomy that would be useful for organizations that are both looking to get into badges as a new thing, and that, kind of the stereotype at this point of, oh, badges, they look cool, how do we do that? And then using this as a tool to sort of organize and say, okay, well, there's a fundamental difference here between what we're recognizing as attendance versus what we're recognizing in terms of domains of knowledge. But I also want to make something that is useful to organizations that already have either established curricular or established badging programs to be able to look at this pretty quickly and say, like, oh, I think that this might actually fit better with, calling it a performance badge or that sort of thing, so that it fits comfortably within this, but not necessarily as an absolute. So that's why I said I don't want the taxonomy necessarily to be maybe even a finishing point, but rather as a starting point, so that when organizations issue badges, there is fundamental distinction between the types. So in the research, that's actually, particularly with people that are very anti-badge, that's one of the very apt criticisms is that there's no real distinction between the different types of badges, that people get badges and they don't care about them because there's no real distinction between what they mean or how they should be interpreted. Whereas when you get a transcript from a university, that's fairly universal. People know what to do with that. They know what it symbolizes. They know what it signals. That signaling is not as clear in badges. In this taxonomy, the purpose of it is meant to be a clear signal to people looking at it that the organization that has issued it has thought clearly about, are we making a claim to someone understanding an entire domain of knowledge, or are we making a claim that this person has satisfied a very specific set of skills, or are we making the claim that this person participated in an event, made a contribution to it, but we're not saying that this person actually learned anything by doing it. So this, unfortunately, the kind of the point of the taxonomy, at least in my mind, is that it's meant to be kind of a catch-all for a lot of different purposes.
Totally get that and agree.
Yep, no, I get it. I think I'm just looking at it from the perspective of our member companies on ITCC, right? In that we all have major certification programs, and so I think at least my default assumption, and Jim and Kristen and would you guys keep me honest here? I mean, my default assumption is most of the stuff we do is going to be in the rightmost column because they're high stakes certifications that are asking people to demonstrate competency in practice, not just in recall. And so I'm just looking across and trying to mentally sort of picture where the different things we do kind of slot in, right? Like our e-learning courses would be under a grade-based badge. I don't know, Jim.
Yes, you're right. Within our company, though, we interact with those that are in the participation area, for example, and we just need to help them. And this is going to be very helpful in education throughout within our company, because of what James said. You know, he finds a lot of people out there just going, "Oh, great, this is badges, and let's see what we can do with them." You know, so I agree, Clyde. I think we'll stay more towards the right anyway, and I do like what we've got here. It's just I was trying to sort it out in my mind.
Right.
I also inserted an idea. James, you can take it or leave it, but I've been thinking about what Kristen said ever since she said it, and that was a long time ago. Participation possibly could be association badge style. Just threw it out there. Okay, so you don't have to take it or leave it.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm an idea guy, so go ahead. Yeah.
Ed and I, we would probably be spread across all three sections eventually. We have our certification program, but we're also our badging program is going to be targeted at the middle sort of learning content level, and that's going to be all unproctored. So it'll be the level program badge probably rather than the grade based.
Right.
What about having?
I guess the other question. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just because I think that this makes sense to take out the proctoring language under the learning style. Should it be left in there for the competence with validation? I mean, is it a foregone conclusion that if you're issuing something as high stakes as a performance or certification badge that it does have a proctored assessment, or should that?
Yeah, I think that has
to
stay in there. The language for proctoring needs to stay in there for certification.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And for competence with validation, absolutely. I think those two, absolutely, because that's ultimately saying that's high stakes. Whether it's a patient's stomach that's left open and they're having to do it, there's someone there watching it. So I think that's got to stay proctored.
And we may want to consider not in the grade-based. It says proctored learning assessment, but maybe what we have is proctored learning environment instead. And just a suggestion, I know you have to work this through a lot of people. I actually feel sorry for you because I don't work well in those environments.
Well, I guess my thing is we have a lot of badges, and I know this goes back to just us, but I'm going to guess NI is doing a similar thing. We have a lot of these learning-based ones where there is an assessment at the end, but to actually proctor that assessment is is when money comes into play, right? So it means that learning is having to happen in person, or that person is having to go take their test, or at a test center, or it has to be done an online proctoring. And I think that takes it to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there are assessments, but I don't think that assessment necessarily is as important to be proctored. There's got to at least be one of those, because we have standalone ones where it's not proctored, but there has to be an assessment.
You know, it's interesting too, Kristen, is you just, while you're saying this, it reminded me that there is a difference between certification and licensures versus just having proctored assessment of a performance, because a certification requires, you know, industry standard practice, and it requires us actually consulting the SMEs and building the models and all that type of thing, and where a performance may just simply be a company wants to ensure that they have taught whatever it is well. Is that making sense?
That's not how it works for us, at least.
Yeah, I could validate that my neighbor's kid actually mows the lawn correctly, but it may not be the way that the industry wants to see that lawn mowed. That's the difference between a performance badge and a certification badge. Is that we've actually checked around the world, and the best way to mow the lawn is the way I do it. No, just, you know, but you see what I mean?
Yep.
All right.
Okay, so in terms of your meeting, I'm sorry if I hijacked 45 minutes of it. So again, my purpose here was, and I very much appreciate the feedback. What I'm going to do is go back and create a version 3 and work this feedback in. I would imagine that you, again, I have no idea how your group does endorsement or anything like that, and I'm happy to filter another version of this for maybe offline, asynchronous, you know, back and forth. That's perfectly fine. Whatever the procedure is, I would like to pursue getting ITCC support behind this, so that when this goes live as part of ISET's efforts with badges, that we can stamp that on there. So again, I'm happy to do what is needed in terms of revision in order for that to occur at some point in the near future.
So what I would say, Jim, would be to go ahead and when you've got your next version of this that you think is ready, go ahead and send it to us. We can have a conversation, meaning the badge team can have a discussion around this in our January meeting. And I'm not aware in the past that the ITCC has ever endorsed anything. However, I, for one, am not opposed. But I'd like that to be a discussion on the our next board meeting on December 14th.
Cool.
So
I did have a
Emily
question
or
while
Rita,
we...
if you could add that.
I did have a question, and James, thanks for the time. You were the agenda for today, so
Okay.
That's great.
You know, when I'm thinking ahead now to what this would look like to implement and operationalize if we wanted to issue badges for the LF certification. So some sort of, I know we talked about kind of a letter based or some, you know, how would we represent this? You know, is there a way to represent this graphically when we issue a badge so that we create a common visual taxonomy? Because I think part of the battle is trying to have the standard, which is good and has a lot of, you know, to get a lot of alignment behind having it. But the other half of the battle would be the visual, like how do we communicate this out to the people who both issue and use and consume badges?
But I think we talked about that, like having some sort of unified visual at the in-person meeting in Seattle, and the decision there, or not the decision, but the problems we came up with were that it would be near impossible to get some sort of uniformity across all of our different companies. So, but maybe we could have tags or some sort of other identifier that's not necessarily immediately visual. But I agree we need some kind of identifier to make sure these badges are categorized correctly.
I think at the very least, we could have skill tags that went in it. I think getting something on the external view of the badge would be difficult, but certainly on the badge page that talks about it, I think it could make sense there.
So another way to think about this too is that the CEO of ISET, Joe McClary, is very friendly to using technology, certainly to everybody's advantage. And it might be possible to produce a site that is attached to ISET that produces this taxonomy so that it's public. And then in the badge itself, it can be specified where this badge fits with a link to the external site that shows how this taxonomy works for those that might be interested in it. The other possibility is to demonstrate it, to show it as part of the badge visual itself that has a corresponding taxonomic indicator on that as to what type of badge it is. So when you look at the badge physically, like in someone's LinkedIn account, you can clearly see, oh, okay, this is an attendance badge or this is a performance badge, etc.
James, I don't know if you know, there's a couple items in the chat that might be useful.
Yep, I made a screenshot.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. I'm ever the academic. In fact, my full-time job, I'm a lecturer, and in about an hour I have to go lecture on theism. So.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for making the new time. We based it around his teaching lecturing schedule. So I'm glad this time worked for so many.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, outstanding.
Thanks all.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll be in touch. Should I email that to Emily or should I send it to Kristen when I have a new draft?
Please send it to both of us.
Both. Okay. Yep. Happy to do so.
Okay.
And then you guys can help filter that out to everyone else.
Yes. Yeah, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and send it out to the, before our next badging meeting in January. We'll send it out to everybody, and then we can discuss it on the next badging call.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the good work. It's really coming along.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I know we've got about 11 minutes left before the top of the hour. Were there any other subjects that anyone wanted to bring up for today?
This is James.
Nope.
I'm going to get off the call. So thank you, everybody, for your time.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, James. No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. So then we will, I'll have Emily go ahead and send out the updated